The briefing lands on your desk at 6:47 in the morning, and it is not the briefing that was released to the press. That one is 4 pages. This one is 19. The 4-page version explains a military situation in terms that are accurate but incomplete, the way a photograph is accurate but not the same as being in the room. The 19-page version tells you what the photograph doesn't: the number of civilian casualties the operation is projected to produce, the range running from 34 on the optimistic end to 112 if the secondary site is occupied at the wrong time, the intelligence confidence level on that estimate, which is 61%, which means 4 in 10 times the model is wrong. And you are going to make a decision based on a model that is wrong 4 times in 10, and that decision will be announced to the public using the 4-page version, and the 19-page version will be classified for 30 years. You have 40 minutes before the National Security Council meets, and you haven't eaten breakfast, and the decision has to be made today. This is Tuesday. This is a normal Tuesday. If you want to understand what the office actually is, from the inside, without the version they perform for cameras, this is FNB dude, POV, and this is the reality they don't put in the biography. The first thing to understand is that the power is real and the constraints on the power are also real, and both of those things are true simultaneously in a way that is genuinely difficult to hold. From the outside, the Prime Minister looks like the decision. From the inside, the Prime Minister is where every irresolvable tension in government eventually arrives, because every question that can be resolved at a lower level gets resolved there, and everything that can't gets escalated, which means by the time something reaches your desk, it is by definition the hardest version of the problem, stripped of the easy options, presented to you by people who have already tried everything they could think of and run out of road. You are not solving easy problems, you are managing impossible ones. And you are managing them continuously, without pause, with a public face that has to project competence and direction regardless of what the morning's 19-page briefing actually says. The cabinet is not what it appears. It appears to be a council of senior ministers who collectively govern. What it actually is, in the modern era, is a formal ratification mechanism for decisions that have largely been made already in smaller rooms by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and 2 or 3 senior advisors. And the cabinet meeting is where those decisions get the institutional legitimacy of collective agreement. This is not a secret among people who have served in cabinet. It is simply not discussed publicly because discussing it publicly would undermine the constitutional fiction that collective responsibility requires. And collective responsibility is the fiction that holds the entire system together. So you maintain it. You sit at the head of the cabinet table and you manage a room of 22 people, some of whom are your allies, some of whom are waiting for you to stumble, and at least 2 of whom are actively briefing against you to journalists right now, and you know which 2, and you cannot fire them, and you govern anyway. The security changes you before you understand it's changing you. In the first week, there are close protection officers everywhere, and it feels like an imposition, a visibility you didn't ask for. Men and women who know where you are every moment of every day and who stand outside your bathroom door and who follow your children to school in unmarked cars. By the 3rd month, you don't notice it anymore. By the 6th month, you have adapted so completely to being watched and protected that a weekend without them feels wrong, which is itself a form of loss that nobody warns you about and that you don't have language for because the language for it doesn't exist in the public discourse about what this job does to a person. You are 53 years old and you cannot walk to a corner shop without calling it in first. You have not been alone in a room, genuinely alone, without staff or protection or advisors, in 7 months. The information asymmetry is the thing that reshapes your understanding of everything. You now know things about the country, about allies, about the world that you didn't know before. And some of those things change the meaning of events you lived through in previous roles. A foreign policy crisis from 4 years ago, which you understood at the time as a diplomatic failure, you now understand as a deliberate strategic choice made on the basis of intelligence that wasn't shared with anyone outside a very small group. And the choice was probably correct given what that group knew. And the public narrative about what happened is not wrong exactly, but it is operating on different facts than the actual decision was. You have been on the outside of this before. You are now on the inside of it, and from the inside you can see exactly why the gap exists and exactly why closing it would create more problems than it would solve. And so you maintain the gap, and you become one of the people who knows that the public version and the operational version are not the same document. You make a decision in month 4 that you do not fully account for in the moment. A financial regulator brings you a situation. A major bank, the 4th largest in the country by assets, is in a position that will become public within 72 hours unless a private intervention stabilizes it. The intervention requires a guarantee from the Treasury that is not technically illegal, but is not clearly legal either, and it will not be disclosed publicly, because disclosure would trigger exactly the panic the intervention is trying to prevent. Your chancellor is in favor. The governor of the Bank of England is in favor. Your attorney general says the legal exposure is manageable. You authorize it. The bank stabilizes. Nobody finds out. The depositors who would have lost their savings don't lose them, which is real and good. The shareholders and senior executives who would have faced accountability for creating the situation don't face it, which is also real and less good, and is not something you spend significant time on because the decision is made and it worked, and there is a meeting in 11 minutes. 3 months later, a smaller institution, not a bank, a regional building society in the north of England with 340,000 account holders, faces a similar situation. The numbers are smaller. The political optics of a second intervention are difficult. Your advisors tell you the exposure is manageable, meaning the building society fails. The depositors are covered by the statutory guarantee up to £85,000 per account, and the political story is about regulatory failure rather than government inaction. You make the calculation. You let it fail. 31,000 account holders had deposits above the guarantee threshold. They lose the amount above £85,000. The average loss is £23,000. You know this from the briefing. You approve the handling strategy. You attend a committee meeting on transport infrastructure in the afternoon. The staff around you are extraordinary. This is something nobody tells you adequately. The civil service at the highest level is populated by people of genuine intelligence and genuine commitment operating inside constraints that would frustrate anyone. And they work for you with a professionalism that has no equivalent in the private sector. Your principal private secretary, a woman named Catherine who has served 3 prime ministers, knows things about how to make the machinery function that took her 20 years to learn and that she deploys on your behalf every day with quiet precision. She is not political. She serves the office, not the person. There is a distinction there that you learn to respect. She will tell you when something cannot be done, which is more valuable than being told everything is possible. You trust her more than you trust most of your cabinet. The loneliness is structural, not emotional in the way the word usually implies. Structural. You cannot consult freely because everything you say is a potential position. You cannot think out loud because thinking out loud is a briefing opportunity for someone in the room. You cannot be uncertain in public because uncertainty is weakness, and weakness is invitation. So you develop a private thinking space that is very small and that exists mostly in the early mornings, between the 6:30 briefing and the 7:15 first meeting, when you're technically alone with the documents and actually alone with the problem. This is when the real thinking happens. 35 minutes a day. That is the margin inside which you are actually yourself, and you protect it the way some people protect sleep, as the minimum necessary condition for everything else functioning. The press is not what you thought when you were outside it. You knew it was aggressive. You didn't know it was structural. There are journalists who have built entire careers on covering Downing Street and who have sources inside your operation who tell them things you said in rooms you believed were private, and you know this, and you adjust what you say in those rooms, which means you are performing even in the rooms that are supposed to be for genuine discussion, which means the genuine discussion has to happen in a room even smaller than the room you thought was small. There is a story published in a Sunday newspaper in your 8th month that is substantially accurate about a disagreement inside your cabinet, and that could only have come from one of 3 people who were present. You know which one. The source is too valuable politically to remove. You continue. The disagreement was about a policy that affected 2.3 million people. The policy was shaped, partly, by the fact that the person who leaked had leverage, which they used, which is how it actually works. By year 2, you have developed what your wife calls the face. Not unkindly. It's an observation, a specific configuration of attention and control that you wear in public and that doesn't come off immediately when you come home, like a wetsuit that takes a few minutes to peel. She has adapted to it. Your children have adapted to it. Your youngest, who is 16, told you recently that she can't remember what you were like before, which is the kind of thing a teenager says that lands differently when you're the person being described. You note it. You don't have time to examine it properly, and you know that not having time to examine it properly is itself part of what she's describing. The foreign policy dimension is where the gap between public narrative and operational reality is widest, and where the consequences of that gap are most serious, and where you feel the weight of the office most directly. You sit in rooms with leaders of countries whose domestic behavior you find genuinely objectionable, and you conduct those meetings with the warmth and formality that the relationship requires, because the relationship is more important than your opinion of the person, because the relationship produces outcomes that affect people who are not in the room and who will never know what you said or didn't say or what you traded and for what. You shake a hand that you find difficult to shake. You smile for a photograph that will be used domestically by that government to signal legitimacy. You do this because the alternative is a rupture that costs more than the compromise, and you believe that calculation, and it is probably correct. And it is also the kind of thing that a person with fewer scruples than you would say about a worse decision, and you've stopped being able to tell where the line between those two things is. There is a moment, 18 months in, that you don't describe to anyone. You are in the garden at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country residence, on a Sunday evening in September, and it's still light and you are technically off duty, meaning your protection detail is at the perimeter and your phone is inside and you are standing in a garden looking at old trees. And you have a thought, quiet and clear, that you are not entirely sure who is standing in this garden. The person who wanted this, who organized 25 years toward it, who believes in what they're doing, that person is real and present. But there is also a version of you that has been shaped and reshaped and compressed by the office into something slightly different from what arrived, and you are not certain the distance between those two versions is something you can measure anymore, because you've been inside the process while it was happening and you couldn't see it from the inside. You don't call anyone. You go back inside. There's a briefing at 7 in the morning and the decision from Tuesday still needs a follow-up, and Catherine has flagged 3 things that need attention before the week starts. You make a cup of tea. You sit at the desk. You do the work. Somewhere tonight, a backbencher with 12 years in Parliament and a reputation for loyalty and a very clear idea of what they would do differently is doing the math on a leadership contest that is still 2 years away. They know what they want. They know why they want it. They are absolutely certain that the compromises they've watched the current Prime Minister make are compromises they would never make, because they haven't made them yet. And the distance between not having made them and not being capable of making them is a distance you only discover from the inside. They'll find out. That's how it works.